Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. On behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we would like to thank all of our sponsors who have continued to support the symposium during this very challenging year. Before we thank our partners, we'd like to ask that sometime during the symposium's breaks that you visit our partners' virtual booths. You can also visit the Content Hub on the MIT CDOIQ website for some great partner resources. We'd like to thank the following partners: Deloitte, Informatica, Privacy Analytics, DAWX, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Sandal Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Wakira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global IDs, Snowflake, Starburst. And as I said, please make every effort to visit our partners, use the virtual passport, because without them and our partner support, the symposium could not be held. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? This is Peter Anlian. I am facilitating this track A, and we are very pleased to have with us this evening Dr. Shivaji Dasgupta, who's coming to us from Germany. He is the Chief Data Officer and Head of AI and Analytics at Deutsche Bank, and is going to take us through Deutsche Bank's journey, data-driven elements. And I'm going to mute that audio that you hear behind me, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Shivaji. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to speak at this event. And as Peter mentioned, I'm located in Frankfurt, Germany, and leading the efforts on data products and AI at Deutsche Bank. At this event today, I'd be speaking on how Deutsche Bank is going on this journey around AI, and especially how we are trying to use data to create products around data-driven activities and on data-driven products. So unfortunately, I cannot share the slides. That's why Gertrude will be sharing the slides, and I would ask her to very kindly move ahead. So Gertrude, if you could move to the next slide. So the focus, when we started at Deutsche Bank, I joined Deutsche Bank about 2 years back. Before that, I was working at McKinsey for about 6 years. Prior to that, did my PhD in physics. And when I joined Deutsche Bank about 2 years ago, and we started talking about how we can use data and how we can use the data-driven, how can we create these data-driven products, the perspective that we took was, how are other European retail companies behaving, or what is the current status of the European retail market with respect to technology, with respect to the technological developments. And this is just illustrative, but what we have tried to show here is, if you compare Germany with a country like China or Asia Pacific in that sense, you would see what we are exporting out of Germany is more or less physical goods, and what we are importing from outside world is more and more digital goods and digital services. One example is Alipay, where the payment service of Alibaba is actually now the chosen payments provider of one of the biggest chemist markets in Germany. Also for the European Football Championships, which are happening in 2024, once Corona is not there. There also Alipay is one of the chosen partners. The reason why this is quite interesting is any payment transaction, any payment interaction from our perspective, from the bank perspective, is basically a data point, is basically a touch point where we are getting information and data points on the customers, and can offer or can actually create offerings for the customer. Gertrude, if you move to the next slide. The other perspective that we took, which is on the next slide, is how are the most successful companies across the world structured. And this already is kind of old. This is from June 2018, where we saw from a European perspective, actually, there's just one company in the top 10, which is there, SAP, which is also a technological company and actually offering B2B services compared to all the other B2C services from the US or from China in the top 10. The current top 10 rankings actually, I think, there are none of the European companies there. So that already started to get us thinking. And the other movement that we are seeing, and Gertrude, if you just move to the next slide, the other movement that we are seeing is these big platform companies like in Apple or Amazon, even they are moving beyond their core offerings, something which is called the platform economy or verticalization, where we are seeing, and Apple is also moving towards mobile payments via near field communication, or Amazon offering loans to the vendors, and also Uber offering real-time access earnings for each of their drivers. On the next slide, what we tried to do then was to say, okay, what are the advantages that these non-financial companies have compared to financial companies, and what is making them so successful that they are coming into the top 10s? One of the main advantage is the customer acquisition, because they're coming from much different channel acquiring customers. The second one is a much more holistic approach towards data that they are taking. Much to an extent, and this is a European phenomenon, there is a European directive where the banks have to provide the payment service data via an API, a standardized API, to every single industry with the customer consent. And that data is being used, obviously, also by these companies to provide the customers better offering or customized services. The third one is the flexible, high flexible margin of financial products that allows them to add it on to their existing core services. When we dug deeper then on these kind of findings, what we found on the technological side, and Gertrude, if you would move to the next slide, sorry. What we saw on the technological side was there are four main areas which stand out and are common to all these companies. One is the data and how they are using the data, and that's the artificial intelligence part. Then there are the network effects. If you can use the data correctly in the ecosystem between the different companies, between the different players, understand and provide insights across the network, that gives them another added advantage. And lastly, the power of the cloud, the technological advantages, the scalability, the modular services, as well as the SaaS applications, the software as a service applications for doing AI or utilization of data. In this presentation, basically, we'll be concentrating on the first two parts, the data and the AI part, how we at Deutsche Bank are approaching these two topics so that we can power ourselves into what we call the age of platforms. Gertrude, if you'd be very kind to move on. On the AI side, when we see the way we look at AI is not something which is a standalone activity, but rather it's a supporting activity for our human processes. That's why we sometimes, or actually actively call it an advanced intelligence instead of just artificial intelligence, because the advanced intelligence is then helping us to move towards data-driven services or products that we are using. In physical activities, we saw that technology has helped replace the hard brute force tasks in the industry so far. And that's what we promise ourselves, that this kind of technology or AI is going to be helping do much more complex tasks around cognitive intelligence, basically. On the next slide, what we have tried to show, and this comes from my experience a little bit, a couple of jobs which I did in between McKinsey and Deutsche Bank, and how I have been using AI, or a couple of use cases, how I have been using AI or machine learning, to the point to show that AI is not the domain only where GAFAs or Google, Amazon, Apple's, Facebook's of the world are using it, but very common use cases exist. So one company, starting on the left side, ProSieben, it's a media company basically, where I was also the chief data officer. What we did was use offline data from television statistics and basically panel data of the users, to combine it with the online data of startups, which or even just online e-commerce platforms, which were showing their advertisements on these television channels. How we did that was using pixels, personalization, and tracking what kind of demographics are coming to the website immediately after the advertisement was shown. And by seeing these kind of statistics, we could actually fine-tune what is the best placement for the advertisement during the television show. Also, which product needs to be shown in the advertisement so that we have the highest conversion of sales on the website. The second one use case is from an online insurance, which actually had quite a high rate of payouts for human injuries. So basically, if their customers were involved in human injuries, driving, they had to do a huge payout. And by combining anonymized data from other insurances, we could do unsupervised learning there to try and find out what are different categories which are coming out, which may lead to higher instances of these kind of accidents. And what we found was one of the causes was if the driving license was not done in the country where these insurances were being sold, meaning that they were not used to the driving rules, or secondly, if these people were having personalized number plates, then they were less prone to actually creating these accidents or having these accidents, because most of the people who had personalized number plates actually like their cars a lot and drive much safer, supposedly. The third example on the right, that's coming from another insurance company where I worked for, and there we did machine learning, simple random forest, bringing in the data from historical 20 years of building damages, combined it with historical weather data to try and find out which weather parameters are causing what kind of damage, so that with the weather prediction, we could then predict which of the buildings that we have in our scope or in our clients list would actually have damages going forward. This one was actually awarded the best innovation, one of the best innovation at the Gartner Symposium in 2017. And also we started providing this insight, or what we call data insight, as a service to other insurances based on this algorithm that we developed. Going forward at Deutsche Bank, on the next slide, how are we tackling the data and the AI topics? What I realized when I started here was just doing, and not only here, but also at my previous jobs, just doing use cases one after the other, or just doing some sort of an architecture to enable this kind of AI topics is not enough. to get a sustainable traction on these topics. What is important is to actually have a coherent strategy, to start with a clear vision of what do we want to achieve with data strategy, with our current data, internal data, as well as external data. How are we going to be using this kind of touch points of our customers, or also other financial data? Once we have that kind of a vision set out, then we prioritize our use cases based on the cornerstones. And for these use cases, once these have been prioritized, almost hand in hand simultaneously, we start defining the architecture that needs to be the basis, backbone for this kind of this strategy, to enable this strategy. Lastly, what are the capabilities and culture that I would need as a bank to be data-driven? Because just having a strategy and use cases and even defining the best in-cloud, native cloud architecture is not enough if I do not have the engineering and technology mindset to implement this. On the next slide, basically we have shown the data strategy which we have defined for the entire bank. Basically, what we have said is we took the analogy from self-driving cars, where level 5 is basically a completely self-driving autonomous car, and that is totally data-driven or data-backed. And that's why if we take that analogy and start with that for the bank, we said the first level, which needs to be actually fulfilled for this and for almost all financial institutes, is we need to fulfill our regulatory requirements, and that helps us to keep the lights on. If we do not keep the regulatory requirements, then basically we do not have the license to operate. Once we do that, then the next step is for the multiple channels that we have, whether it's the direct channels online or it's the offline branches or even call centers, the various different channels that we have, are we clean with the data in each of the channels, and are we performing enough analytics within each of these channels? The third level is where we start bringing these data sources from each of these channels together. That's what we call state of the art, because having a single source of truth is for us currently the best practice. That's what we are aiming towards. The next level, the level 4, is where we start bringing in external data only for certain events. And to the last level, going to the 5th level, where we then start bringing external data in a streaming real-time platform manner, so that we can offer highly individualized services, not only in the financial service, but also going forward in non-financial services. If you just look at it, from the left side to the right side, it's basically a defensive strategy going into an offensive strategy. I'm not a big fan of this word, but it just goes to show that we are ready to tackle the data topics and also the external data and offer this proactively to our customers. If you would go to the next slide, then actually we have shown you a couple of use cases on the next slides, and I would just go through quite quickly through this so that we can go into the question answers, and if there are questions around this, I can deep dive. The first one is something like a level 3, where we are bringing in the data from the different channels. And here what we did, and this is a very timely example actually, because of COVID-19, we had quite a few queries coming in from our customers, mostly corporate customers, especially regarding the government bailouts or government loans that they were expecting to get. The questions were more or less repetitive, and we knew in which direction the answers are going to be, which forms need to be filled, which documents are required. And that's why what we did was put in a simple chatbot in place to interact with the customers, rule-based initially, but we are now bringing it into a more machine learning level with the dialogue systems and letting it interact and learn from its interactions with our customers. Already 600 users are using this for their queries. The next use case on the next on the next page is a more level 4 kind of use case where we are trying to bring in also external data. Here, this is a use case which we have implemented for one of our brands in Germany called the Postbank, where we are providing pre-approved automatic loans, consumer loans, to customers who need it. So if a customer would log in onto his online banking and realize that he wants to have a loan, he can just click on a certain amount which we have pre-approved for him and offer him that. Why we did it was because we saw that for this particular brand, for the segment of customers who are interacting with this brand, there was a lot of queries and a lot of questions and also interest in consumer loans up to about 15,000, 20,000 euros. And what we have now started doing is, based on the transactional history, based on also digital twins, started creating sort of approval levels for amounts specific to each of these individuals, so that we know that, okay, for this kind of an individual, up to this amount does not need any approval, and we can just give them the loan. As we saw, very good results, 36% year-on-year improvement of the sales figures for an average volume of about 12,000 euros that we gave. And what we did, where the external data comes in, is for momentary scoring, the credit scoring of the customers. And that's why we called it the level 4 example. Another example where we have used this kind of scoring and external data level 4 use case is on the next page for commercial clients, where we have created churn prevention scores, where we have identified which are the customers which may leave the bank and how can we offer them something which is interesting to them. I personally believe that if a customer is about to leave a bank or any of these organizations, it's not a matter of offering them similar products again or just having a conversation. It's mostly something that we need to offer them upselling a new product or cross-selling a different product. And that's why you'll see on the next page, what we have done along with this is to identify which kind of customers would be relevant for a particular product, which is international FX trading activity. And this product is currently being used by only a set of customers. And if we see that in the transaction history of other kind of customers who may also be relevant for this product, then we are reaching out to them proactively to sell this product as well. So far, we see quite a high 6% conversion ratio. I mean, for those of you who are in the know, a conversion ratio of anything between 2 to 10% is very, very good. Generally, online conversions ratios are anywhere between 2 and 3%. So the 6% conversion ratio is actually pretty good for us. And we are now rolling this out as well. Last two examples are around level 5, where we have used our transaction data for the customers, obviously with their consent, to provide to an external software, tax software company called Bool in Germany. And I guess in every country, filling out tax forms is quite complex and takes a lot of time. And what this use case actually helps with the customers, which is live since 2019, is with one click, we are helping the customers upload their entire year history of transaction data into the tax software, which together with us developed these categorization of with machine learning and AI categorization of the transaction data to fill in the tax form for the benefit of the customer. And this is for us something where we think this goes beyond our bank services, what we provide the customer, but rather goes into really beyond banking services for our customer. Similarly, the last use case which I brought is also in this direction, where together with all the different customer data, transaction data, what we have started to look at is, are there customers who are saving enough for their future pension, especially the young customers? And based on demographic, based on comparisons, can we offer these customers certain kind of advice, support on saving money better for the future? We call this product Future Me. We are still kind of putting our prototypes together, but this is something where we have tested this idea with the customers. We have created this products, this prototype, and now what we are doing is going live with the prototype and testing this out. So on the next slide, basically, apart from these use cases which we are doing for the bank, something which we totally believe in is, as a German bank, as a strong bank in Germany, we have the technological advantage only if we join hands with other companies in Germany and with other financial institutes in Germany and in Europe. And in this respect, on one side, we are already realizing a cross-industry data pool with multiple companies, multiple industries across Germany. This was an idea which we actually also brainstormed and came up with the MIT initiative on digital economy with Jeff Parker around how can we come at par with the platform companies, because in Europe, traditional companies, we have our views only on singular industry data. And if we can combine complete anonymized process data across the industries to provide insights for ourselves, or even across sustainability over the supply chain, for example, those are the kind of things that we are approaching with this kind of cross-industry data pool. The second part, the lower half on the page, is another initiative which is being driven by the German government and the French government. And what the vision is to create a federated cloud where the data centers and the data remains within the companies in regulated environment, but the algorithms and the AI can be developed across these companies with something called federated learning. And one of the main use cases where we are looking at in the financial side is obviously anti-money laundering, so that we can avoid anti-money laundering not only within our company, but based on the information and based on the knowledge across the industry. That brings me to a point that when we are trying to share data across different industries, across different banks and financial industry, this requires very strong requirements on privacy, on regulation. And on the next page, what we have tried to show you is, although there are very good use cases for innovation and on data sharing, on data democratization, and there is also a lot of regulation on trying to share the data, there is technology available which makes it possible to share, or rather learn from the data across each of these different data sources via data privacy engineering and machine learning. Gertrude, can you please go to the next slide? Exactly, around the technology for the data privacy and data sharing via federated learning. This was one of the topics which was talked about in detail in one of the sessions in the afternoon today. And I thought the session was touching upon very, very important points, which we are also right now in our prototypes and POCs looking at. So Gertrude, on the next slide, what we have tried to show is an architecture which we are putting together, where there is a privacy and security core, where total complete secure data is there, but you can create synthetic versions of this data for analytics. Also, you can have a federated layer, a data federation layer, orchestrating the data from the private data part as well as from the synthetic part. And this entire thing can be within a cloud platform. This is exactly what we are doing right now. A couple of weeks ago, we also announced our strategic partnership with Google, going exactly for these kind of purposes, kind of defining these core enablers for advancing AI and data-enabled business models in the financial industry. So on the last part, Gudrun, on the next slide, what we have tried to see is how can we enable this data strategy, use cases, as well as the architecture with the capabilities. What kind of capabilities do we need? What kind of culture do we need? What kind of a model do we need to work together? And what we have come up with is a joint co-located model. And co-located is with a pinch of salt, obviously, because even before COVID, we were virtually co-located. So we have teams sitting in India, teams sitting in Ireland, teams sitting in Germany and the US, London, and we are working all together as a team, as an agile team, but virtually, where you have on one side the business, where they are defining their strategic use cases. On the other side, you have, Gertrude, if you can just go back one slide, please. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. And on one side, you have the data people who are analyzing the data use cases, implementing the algorithms. And on third angle, you have the technology people who are enabling the architecture, who are bringing the tools to implement this. And these three pieces of a triangle fit in really well. What is really important, and this is something which is at the core of this, is data architecture. I think I cannot stress enough how important it is that the data architecture in this role, whether it's within data analytics or technology or in business, this data architecture needs to understand the business processes, the systems relevant, the data that is needed, the analytics, and the technology that would be required to enable this. And that's why this works. Now we can move to the next slide. That what we are realizing is that there are multiple benefits to monetization. I showed you quite a few use cases to realize that. I'm not going to go through all these points, but there are also potential risks, whether it's to the institution of exposing competitive knowledge by sharing too much of our data, or on the regulation side, where we can breach the customer privacy, and also for the customers where inadvertently there may be misuse of personal data. And that is why it is really important that the aspects of the architecture are taken care of very, very clearly. Concepts of data privacy engineering, concepts of synthetic data, concepts of federated learning, are very important to be looked at in detail. Lastly, a couple of slides, and then I'll take all the questions. One of the things which we have, which we are really pushing for within Europe, especially continental Europe, is financial sandboxes. Now, right at the beginning, I talked about the platforms, how they are using data from different avenues, different channels, and also the financial data or transaction data, which they can access with PSD2, with customer consent. We as a financial institute are quite regulated, and something like, and this is an example which I think is quite relevant, a credit scoring for loans is something that is highly regulated, whether it's the credit score, whether it's the parameters that are involved in credit. And we may end up actually rejecting quite a large section of customers for certain loans, because in the ever-changing world right now, they may not be able to provide data on certain of the parameters which we require. And that's why something like giving education to, let's say, immigrants or mid-aged people who have lost jobs, they may benefit if we can include new data sets to see what is their social network, what is it that they are trying to study, how can we improve their lifestyle or quality of life with these new data. Also in homes, if we can include smart home data for better home loans, that's something, or renovations, that's something which we are also interested in. But to do that, we would require sandboxes, regulated sandboxes, to try these kind of experiments with smaller groups. At the very end, something which I talked about, reputational risks for customers. One of the things which I think as an institute, as a bank, what we are always, especially as a global bank, what we are struggling with is what is the ethical standpoint? What is the ethical use of AI that we can kind of present? And one of the experiments done by MIT, the moral machine experiment, shows that there is no single global view of ethics around AI. The question was asked, if there's a self-driving car, and on one side there is an old lady, on the other side there are children, which side should the car drive? And if there's an obstacle in front of it. And as you see, depending on the country, whether it was France or Japan, the answers varied dramatically. This is something which we as a bank are looking at very, very carefully. And there is a working group which we have found, although there are no regulations, strict regulations around guidelines on ethical use of AI, we are already working very strongly to make sure that all the applications, use cases of AI are under this ethical use. Lastly, the takeaway, what I think that AI is important for financial industry. I don't have to be repeating that to this group. What is important to understand, and this is our approach, that AI and the use of AI has to be on a use case by use case approach, and it needs to be in compliance with the regulations that we have in place. Secondly, it's important to realize that there needs to be a transition of the skills for these to be implemented sustainably, AI to be implemented sustainably within the bank and any industry. And lastly, it needs to follow a defined ethical principle, and also there should always be a human hand looking at the implementation. It needs to go hand in hand and not be machine driven. That was my quick round of review of how Deutsche Bank is going about the topics of AI, how we are looking at these topics. Happy to take any of the questions. I think there already is one question. Let me see if I can have a look at it.
Sure. Can you see those? We've got a couple of questions, and for folks who are watching, we've got about 15 minutes left, so we have time to field other questions if you have them while we're answering these couple here. Can you see it, Shivaji, or would you like me to read it?
I can see it. So the question is from Tom. Hi, Tom. The question is there a change in the desirability of platform-based business models? And platforms have been criticized for data quality and asked to polish their data. So I would say the question, the answer is a mixed bag, right? I mean, I wouldn't say there is a desirability to move away from platform economy models. What there is a clear move is how can these platform economic models be regulated better? And that's what we are trying to see. I mean, my favorite example is if you want to open a bank account, you have to kind of go through heaps and heaps of paper and all sorts of requirements which you need to sign as a customer. But if you want to open an Apple account or iTunes account, all you need to do is just press agree. And that just takes a couple of seconds, right? I mean, sure, there are a lot of requirements there, but you're not really required to read them. You just push a yes. And that's something that needs to be looked at, how you regulate that. But the business model, the economic principles behind this, I think those are something which we still believe in. And the network effects that the platform brings in, I totally believe that they are economically very profitable. Tom, does that answer your question?
Hopefully he'll let us know.
Yeah. So the next question, do you look at your data federation layer as a mechanism to provision ephemeral sandboxes per project, or rather as a central enterprise data warehouse? That's a very good question. So we are experimenting with both right now, and especially given that we are moving towards the Google Cloud partnership and also doing a couple of POCs there, we are looking at both. I wouldn't be able to answer you yes or no, one way or the other. Both look interesting. Where we are already doing some use cases rather than just POCs is already on the central enterprise data warehouse area. The next one around, are you trying to build digital services and products? Where are the biggest challenges in building them? So yes, we are trying to build, when we talk about data-driven products, and that's what I am trying to establish at the company, they are not just digital services, they're also non-digital data-driven services and products. But a big part, obviously, is digital services and products. One example which I have is the pricing of our products. Now, pricing of these products are not only on the digital channel, but they also are for our offline interactions with the customers in the branches. And there we need to use the data from not only the offline, but also from the online side, bring them together and offer the right services and products to our customers. What are the biggest challenges? That's the second part of the question. I think the biggest challenge is the mindset. When we are trying to do this and cultural aspect of it, there's a lot of people, or there's a lot of questions around technology. I personally believe that most of the things that we would like to implement today, there are technological solutions available to implement most of these use cases in effect. what we need to do is bring in the right mindset, ask broader questions, or be open to hearing answers which we may not like. And that's why I think that's the biggest challenge in a large corporation around these implementation.
Let's see. One more just came in. Before I copy and paste it, I'll just read it.
Sure.
You mentioned cross-industry data in many use cases. What standards and taxonomies and models have you considered for standardizing data across industries?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. So most of the use cases that we are looking at across the industry are with data that are having a very standard taxonomy or topology. Let me take the example of anti-money laundering across the banks. When we look at those kind of data for each of the banks, they have a certain way that are reported to the central bank. There are certain ways these data are tabulated or the taxonomy exists. And that's where the comparison or mixing of the data becomes easier. The more complex questions around product-driven or process-driven use cases or data is something we are looking at, and we are starting with the metadata comparison to bring these taxonomies together. I'm sorry, I cannot elaborate too much around that, but we are still in the process of looking at those challenges.
So I've got a question. Where is Deutsche Bank in the race for data maturity, dominant, putting it to use in the market among financial industry? And who do you learn from? What other industries do you look at?
Yes. So the first question, or the first part of the question, where do we as a company stand? I think in the financial world, and I'll take Europe because that's where I focus very strongly. In Europe, within the financial industry, I think we're doing quite a good job. And if you see a hyperscaler cloud provider like Google, strategic partnerships with them, it's not only a one-way street where we are profiting, it's also Google that's profiting from our understanding and our knowledge on these bank topics, bank relevant topics on these kind of areas. And I think that's why we as a bank are well positioned in this data topic when you compare us with the financial industry. That said, there's still a lot to do. And that's where your second question is very relevant. Who are we learning from? And we see the fintechs in Europe as well as in the US as partners. And we are working very closely with the fintechs. Who we do see as strong competitors are truly the platform providers, as talked in the beginning of the presentation, with payment providers who are coming in from online platforms or consumer loans or even commercial loans being provided by these platform providers. And those are competition that we need to learn from how they are doing it. And if you see most of these platform companies, and I would take a very central data-driven example here, like Salesforce, their entire business as a platform is driven on data, and they have literally been engaging in multiple different avenues. And that's where we as a bank can learn not to replicate their business model, but how can we position our technology so that we'll be successful with our business with their learnings, let's say.
Very good. Well, I don't see any other questions here. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
Sure, thank you.
Hope to see you in Cambridge this time next year.
Sure, happy to be there. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And if there are any questions, more than happy to answer them offline as well. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and more than happy to answer the questions. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Take care. Have a good evening.